All right, guys, we're going to talk a little bit about how the war was funded on the home front here. And one thing important to know is that the war cost in modern equivalent $3 trillion, and that's for the U.S.'s role in World War II. The government relied on deficit spending, just like they did in World War One, and of course, this will require borrowing money. One of the ways this happened was war bonds. Now you can see for this war bond in particular was $50, but as you'll notice that war bonds could be purchased in small or large amounts. And what happens is a citizen would buy a bond now, in this case, giving the government $50 that it needs, to fight for the war right now, and then later on they would collect the money and interest several years later. So we see $50 here, and I believe it says 234.56. It's kind of hard to see on there, but I believe this also says December, I don't know, 3rd, 1949 or something like that. So apparently, about 4 years later or so, they would, in this case, collect, more than 4 times, almost 5 times the money that they invested. And this was really good because it allowed all citizens to participate, and you might not have $50. Certainly, that was a lot more than $50 right now is worth back in that time. But of course, this was a way where you didn't have to have 50. You had $1, you had $5. You had whatever it would be. You could still participate and support the war, and this really served to sort of unify people that they're all pulling in the same direction. As a result of the war, people also began to relocate. We have about 15 million civilians relocated during the war. And of course, whenever there's massive relocation, people from all races and walks of life went to new surroundings, new interactions, and in many cases, these were with people they were unfamiliar with and may or may not have similar political views. Now, one of the results of this massive movement was that the racial animus increases. There were brutal riots broke out in over 45 cities. The worst in Detroit and Los Angeles. And the most infamous in Los Angeles was the infamous Zoot Suit riots. This is an example of a Zoot Suit. And a zoot suit is a specific type of clothing that requires lots of cloth during a time when cloth was being rationed. Remember, we talked about that yesterday, how all sorts of things were changing. Men and women's style of clothing was changing. We had mentioned that less cloth in suits and less buttons in suits, and women were giving up stockings so they could use the nylon and silk in parachutes and things like that. And so, with most people trying to rally behind the war effort and show their support to it, some people interpreted the wearing of zoot suits as a political statement rejecting the war effort. And you never really know how it starts, but rumors of zoot suiters attacking white sailors touched off 4 days of rioting in Los Angeles because then the sailors heard, oh, we're getting attacked, huh? They came in and they started attacking the zoot suiters, and 4 days later it was finally over, but a lot of damage was done. Well, once again, shouldn't surprise anybody. Women step up yet again, and just like World War One, many families, broken up because the husband or father went overseas, and this required, of course, women to be the breadwinner, just like World War One. And women, just like World War One, took the jobs and did a fantastic job. And again, women were an integral part of the U.S. war effort. You might be familiar with this, the famous Rosie the Riveter, and this is actually real people riveting. Uh, looks like maybe a tank in the background or something like that. And of course, women doing the heavy mechanics job. Right there, fixing a tread on a tank, it looked like. So, yet again, women, integral, extremely important part of war, as always. Well, perhaps the most infamous and shameful action the United States took in World War II was the internment of the Japanese and Japanese Americans. Remember, Pearl Harbor was December 41, so we have March 42, FDR issues Executive Order 9066. Very important to know this one. This requires all Japanese and Japanese Americans Remember, people born in the United States, they are American citizens. And if they're in California, Oregon, or Washington, they have to be, as I say, evacuated from the West Coast. It's an interesting word. They're sent to relocation centers, which are really what we'd call internment camps. And these camps were really in desolated areas. I mean, look at some of these Tule Lake way up there, like in the southeastern Idaho, northern Wyoming, southeastern Colorado, literally in the middle of nowhere. And they were told, these Japanese and Japanese Americans were told, listen, you have a week or so, you have to sell all of your stuff, and you can't bring anything with you. And many of them were forced to sell everything they'd worked their whole life at deep, deep, deep discounts. And remember, many of these were Japanese Americans, meaning they had Japanese ancestry, but they were born in the United States. They were citizens of the United States. So how would you possibly justify treating your citizens like that? Well, some sought to justify the removal by claiming Japanese and Japanese Americans would aid the Japanese military when, not if, but when a Japanese invasion of the West Coast took place. And there wasn't really very much evidence, or actually any evidence, to support that. But apparently the fear won the day. A couple years after, Korematsu versus United States was filed in Supreme Court. It was challenging, say, hey, look, this is unconstitutional. Now, obviously, you didn't get any due process. There was no hearing. There was no court appearance. You were, forced to move. So, I mean, obviously, it's unconstitutional. But the court upheld internment as constitutional, saying that in a time of war, judges shouldn't make decisions. It should be the generals or something like that. Despite this disrespect and actually, illegally being forced to move, some interned Japanese volunteered for military duty, and in fact, the 442nd Regiment was comprised of people from internment camps, and they performed admirably and earned numerous awards. And then finally, in 1988, the U.S. government acknowledged their mistake, and the Korematsu was revisited. And believe it or not, one of my professors at UCSD, Peter Irons, was actually a lawyer in the 1988 case, or not the 1988 case, the 1988 ruling, and awarded $20,000 to internment survivors. And sure, the money is great and everything like that, but $20,000 probably didn't, come close to nearly covering all the bad things that happened. But the important part is that the United States recognized what it had done was wrong. All right, thank you so much.